And now back to your regular programming.
If you speak better to yourself.
You showed up for probably the dumbest conversation we've ever had on this show.
Let's have that smile again.
Tell me how that happens. Physically should not happen.
Relax.
If you say
Give me as well.
3 times a day, God will line it up.
He's just an absolute hack, and he gets his ass kicked by the teammates every week. It's just terrible.
College football playoff is behind us, and we're here to break down every single outcome of the first round. Not a lot of competitive matchups, a lot of blowouts, all that coming up and more. Before we get there, though, Sean, can you share with our listeners a quick word from BetOnline?
The thing that I love about this college football playoff is how I'm going to learn about how to bet next year's college football playoff. And it's looking like you're playing outside at home. You're going to have a big advantage. Shocker. If you were smart and you were putting down some money at BetOnline on some of the home teams, you were having a good weekend. BetOnline has the largest selection of odds. I don't know why you would be dabbling with basketball right now. NHL, I get it. It's cold. Maybe you're inspired to watch some hockey, but it's the college football playoff, NFL home stretch. You got everything that you need for football betting right here and right now. Head to BetOnline today, and don't forget to use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for your welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, the game starts here.
Well, if you bet on a lot of these favorites to cover, Sean, you probably made a good amount of money. Let's get to the first one. Notre Dame completely outmuscles Indiana. Now, the 27-17 score is not indicative of how this game played out. If you just box score scouted, one might say, oh, Notre Dame, they played a close game against Indiana. They were up big on them. They allowed a late garbage time drive and then a recovered onside kick that then led to another touchdown that made this a 10-point game. Throughout the entirety of this, we saw Notre Dame's defensive line completely smother Curtis Rourke. He was unable to find very much room to operate in the pocket. They were having a ton of issues trying to run the ball as they only managed sack adjusted to only produce 73 rushing yards. They also didn't allow much separation to Indiana's receivers that could not get open. The leading receiver was Elijah Surratt, who had 67 yards on 4 receptions. Notre Dame looked really dominant. Their offense could have been a little bit better, could have finished in the red zone a little bit more consistently. Felt like they were just a hair complacent and trying to lock down all of those scoring opportunities. But Notre Dame, I think the biggest thing for me, Sean, is proving that while there's a lot of conversations of teams with easy schedules getting handouts to be here, it felt like Notre Dame, with the dominant way that they won the ball game, affirmed that they deserve to be here and that they're going to provide a competitive matchup against Georgia.
Yeah, that was a huge win for the good guys. Give me some, Team Notre Dame.
Just give me a little bit. Put your hand down. Put your hand down and react to the game. Put your hand down and react to the game.
That was shocking.
Antagonist. How's Kirk Cousins?
Hey, okay, that's easy.
Yeah. No.
What team is surging?
You want to antagonize me, and you expect me not to.
I'm trying to
bite back.
I'm not trying to antagonize. They made a good run. Everything that I said about Notre Dame after the incident has come true. Everything. They have absolutely put themselves in a respectable position. This was a good win against Indiana. Indiana, confusing for a playoff game where you are the underdog and you don't have the talent across the board that really compares with the athletes that Notre Dame had. They played very conservatively. I think that they just should have taken more chances. You don't have another game after this, so why not take some more risks if I'm Indiana in that first half? If it's 3 and out, go ahead, 3 and out, 3 and out, stalling drives, you have to change something. You have to take some shots. And Notre Dame's defensive line, they were getting home. They were flustering Rourke. And I think the big difference was Riley Leonard's ability to actually break out of sacks, escape pressures, and not stall out their drives by having to throw it out of bounds, or he could at least get it back to the line of scrimmage on a run. That was a huge factor for Notre Dame, is having the mobility from the quarterback position. And Leonard outplayed Rourke in this one. Rourke did not have his best game. He needed to hit a couple big passes. He didn't. And I think that was the big separation points on the few times that they actually tried to push it down the field and had beat the tight Notre Dame coverage. They should have put more pressure on. It was such a boring game plan. And I think Notre Dame just likes to take advantage of teams that don't want to keep them on their heels.
And I think the other part about this too, a lot of people, it's easy just to take it at the simple face value. Oh, Indiana stunk. They were overrated, blah, blah, blah. The aspect of Indiana that was so strong this year was their run defense. If we look back at the way that they played against Ohio State, they had a really good game against that Ohio State rushing attack. They bottled up Quinshon Judkins. Travion Henderson, I think, had 7.6 yards per carry in that game, but he didn't have a ton of rushing attempts. It's kind of comparable to how in this playoff performance, Jeremiah Love has the 98-yard rushing touchdown and then has a couple other decent plays in the passing game. Apparently, I think his father had tweeted out that he had the flu, so they were limiting his touches, wasn't fully available to play the total workload that one would have thought he would be able to give. But Jadarian Price, under 3 yards per carry in this game. Riley Leonard had some nice drive extension plays, but didn't have a huge impact as a runner. That was going up against a good rushing attack. And for them to net almost 200-yard rushing in this game is, I think, a proof that Notre Dame can go toe-to-toe with a lot of teams that have good defensive lines. That was, again, to reiterate, don't downplay the one thing that Indiana did the best. They did the best was play really good run defense. They had some really good defensive linemen that were some of the best in the country. Everything else was a bit inflated, but that was their strongest part of their roster. It's not comparable to Georgia, but I still believe that that is proof and an indicator that they can step into that matchup with Georgia and they can find ways to run the ball. It's going to be hard. It's going to be a hard out, but there is going to be a path for them to be able to move the ball downfield.
Yeah, they do have the big horses up front. The offensive line is really good. Indiana, I don't know if I love all the narrative of Indiana. They shouldn't have been in there. They're a Big Ten representative. And the way that we've seen the shift happen, it's SEC and Big Ten. And all these SEC people don't realize they're in the same boat. Yeah. And you are literally, if you're trying to do this separation bit and you're trying to make Super Conference 2.0, whatever you want to call it, you can't start admonishing somebody that it was a team from a conference that had one loss because that's going to set a nasty precedent in case SEC has a down year and the Big Ten, if Michigan's really back and they have a ton at the top, it's setting a nasty little precedent for Big Ten against SEC narratives in the future. I think Indiana still belonged. So what? It's a first-round game. Notre Dame was the better team, and they won the game. It's what you expected. If the first round, hopefully you eventually start getting matchups where there's more competitiveness. But to kick it off, I didn't mind it. I didn't mind the scenery. I liked it was a home game. I liked that Indiana had a shot, and they just didn't put together the best game plan, I don't think.
Well, the next blowout, this game was over at halftime. It was 28-0 at halftime, Sean, and you really didn't need to watch the second half to know what happened in this game. Penn State just smoked SMU. SMU showed a little bit of life early because their defense was playing really well. And I give credit to Elijah Roberts and the D-line for just being all effort. But they could not survive the turnovers that Kevin Jennings produced in the first half. The 3 interceptions that he had, 2 pick sixes, it was incredibly backbreaking. And at a certain point, that many mistakes caught up to them. It was abysmal. It was impossible to try and watch or even fathom how does SMU survive this game when Kevin Jennings is trying to extend drives, extend plays, and then he's just dishing the ball to the opposing team, 2 of which that go for long touchdowns. We'll have the discussion of if they belonged in a second, but just generally, what do you think of this Penn State team? Their defense looked unbelievable.
I mean, the D-line had Kevin Jennings in hell, absolute hell. What do you do when you have Abdul Carter just running down your face every single time that you're dropping back to pass? So that's what it was. The SMU offensive line just could not keep up, and they couldn't keep the chaos out of the backfield. And you know what? That's really tough circumstances for Kevin Jennings, who isn't an elite quarterback, going up against a defense that is just crushing him. That's just awful circumstances. You have to assume that a couple turnovers are going to stem from it. 2 pick sixes is horrendous. 2 pick sixes just can't happen, and it's really unfortunate for an SMU team that was fun this year. Really fun to come in and just kind of get bullied like that. And I thought their offensive line was maybe going to have a better protection scheme, maybe some more chips. But like I've said all year, Abdul Carter in a wide 9, scariest sight that you could see in college football in 2024. There's nothing scarier. I don't care if it's a Ryan Williams one-on-one, doesn't matter to me. Going up against that guy with that much space, it's going to cause havoc. And you know what? Good for Penn State. They didn't start slow. They decided, hey, we're going to take this one seriously. We're not going to give SMU a chance, which I was certain that James Franklin was going to have his paws all over this one. Say, all right, I'm going to do my bit here. I'm going to underachieve, but SMU is not a big dog, so he didn't really flop.
So they didn't underachieve, and Tom Allen coached a really good defense, playing really good contain. That Kevin Jennings is trying to extend the play, and then as he's looking around, nothing's opening up, and then that's what led to those early turnovers. But we do need to acknowledge here, if there wasn't such a talent gap, this game wouldn't have ended up being so lopsided, and they wouldn't have been given the grace of how bad their offense was playing. Their offense badly needed the cushion that they were afforded by the 2 early interceptions that were returned for touchdowns, to the point where they were matching them in the first half for the amount of points that the defense scored compared to what the offense put on the board. I think that it is important to discuss, and it's not going to happen against Boise, but when they get to that Final Four team part of the bracket, they're going to smoke Boise, by the way, if that's how they looked against SMU. I mean, like, that is going to be a bloodbath. That is going to be, if they were able to do that and bottle up the one good player on SMU's offense, Ashton Genty is probably going to have a good game, but Maddox Madsen is going to be flailing for his life.
Easy now, Matt. He's quirked up. Let him go, man.
One athletic trait of his that is quirked up other than his waist.
Vision.
I don't know about that one, Chief. What I was trying to say, though, is that when they get to those Final Four teams and they play Notre Dame or they play Georgia, they have to be like completely locked in at the beginning of the game. They were really all over the place. And that SMU D-line is good, and they were giving great effort at the beginning of the game, but they're going to face much more difficult battles going up against SEC defensive linemen or that Notre Dame defensive line that is extremely smothering. They can't start slow. It is something that definitely needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I wouldn't run it with Aller as much. I just let the 2 awesome running backs that you have run the rock. Aller, at times in this game, really overthought some decisions and was trying to it wasn't hero ball deep shots, but he wasn't just taking the easy first decision that converts a first down or just makes the play and keeps the offense moving. It looked like he was always trying to make a play. Sometimes the play is made for you, and all you have to do is, I'll just dump it right off to my running back into the flat for the first down. If he can just let that water just sit at a simmer and not start boiling over. I know you want the pasta right now, Aller. I know you want it, but you got to cook it right. You can't just start overcooking it. Let the water flow out. Just stay at an even keel. And I think he could actually operate this Penn State offense in a way that could scare other defenses. Their defense can keep them in games, sure. But as long as they're not spasmodic on offense and overly eager to get into the end zone, they can stay balanced and really cause some fits.
I was trying to figure out if Drew Aller was Italian or not, and if what you said was be deemed offensive. I could not find anything. The other conversation here that gets opened up, though, that I just want to get out of the way, because there were a lot of people yelling and grandstanding about the fact that Indiana should not have been in the playoff. And I think that conversation is a little bit more nuanced. It's the debate of, well, they didn't play anyone. They still blew everybody out. Did Indiana do more to prove that they were worthy of being there than Alabama, Ole Miss, and South Carolina? I think that just by a hair they did. Alabama and Ole Miss and South Carolina probably would have put up closer games, but I still think Notre Dame would have won those opening matchups based on the way that they played and how they came out swinging to start the game. But SMU, and I said that this the minute the bracket was released, they didn't belong. They clearly did not belong on that same field with Penn State. The talent gap was so noticeable. The coaching gap was also noticeable. this was not the circumstance of where Indiana couldn't help their schedule. So they said, and the same thing applied for Notre Dame, where they said, you know what? We can't get the signature win. We're going to go out and play through all 4 quarters, and we're just going to blow out everybody that we play. SMU is living off of a schedule where, let's run through their last few games. They beat Cal 38-6, 33-7 to Virginia. Wow, I'm bad at reading these. They only won by 10 over Boston College, 38-28. They beat Pitt 48-25. They won by 1 over Duke, 28-27. They have a close win over Louisville, 34-27. And the BYU loss, they suffered by 3 points at the beginning of the year. Their resume and their schedule was far less impressive playing up against a bunch of unranked ACC teams. I don't know how anything that they've done this season really seemed impressive enough to think, oh, they could go out there and put up a fight against Penn State. There wasn't shit that they did all year that made me think that was going to happen. This is the one team that I will agree out of all 12 that were in the playoff field that did not freaking belong. How are we going to stick them in there after the final time that they were given a chance to prove themselves against Clemson and they fought their way back? But Clemson also doesn't really belong in the conversation for how barely they snuck into the playoff just because they won their conference. We should be allowed to kick teams out if they play like shit in their conference championship games. And if their offensive line looked as bad as they did in the conference championship, they're going to look as bad as they did in the playoff. We shouldn't be surprised by this outcome.
This is not all SMU's fault, and this is not all Clemson's fault. You know whose fault it is? It's Miami's fault. Because if Miami was in the CFP,
it's a fair point.
Nobody would have a problem.
Always Miami's fault.
It is 100% certifiably Miami's fault for losing to Georgia Tech and then losing to Syracuse. You don't do that, everyone's happy. Everyone is sitting here toasting up, looking at Cam Ward in a possible CFP situation with a good offense and a really fun team. So all the misplaced anger for SMU winning a bunch of games and Clemson winning the games that mattered, I don't take as much stock into it. It's just how the conference shook out, whereas Mario Cristobal couldn't just step up on a nice, easy meatball pitch down the middle and hit a double. Nope, he just basically bunted at the end of the year, and we were left with SMU.
I mean, it's not even a bunt. He struck out. He had a 3-0 count and struck out.
Oh, okay.
That was what Mario Cristobal had.
There you go. I like that. He started swinging out of the zone. This is all, I'm putting if I have any boredom or displaced anger with the ACC in this CFP, I'm going right to Miami. I'm not blaming the teams that were in the conference championship because I guess they did the right things all year. Let's like really peel back the curtain here.
Okay. This is Florida State's fault. Florida State opens the narrative for the conference not being competitive enough to support them. And then they play like utter shit. So they needed to be, and they had the roster. If it wasn't for DJU stinking and them not having a quarterback, they had the roster to be an SEC caliber team in the ACC and to represent the ACC. The two real representatives, if things had gone according to plan and if Mike Norvell hadn't have done the worst coaching job and completely mailed it in this offseason, apparently, if that had come to fruition, the real representatives should have been Miami and Florida State. Those were two rosters that were capably comparable to the teams that were in the playoff field. But instead, because both of them couldn't get the job done, we're stuck with this slop. That's the real people to blame.
I'm looking at this now. 2-10 on the year for Florida State, and they were making all that noise. That is a good curtain peel back there. 1-7. They were really awful this year, weren't they? I hadn't thought about them in a month and a half.
Oh, I think about them a lot.
Looking at this awful team, Jesus, yeah, you were complaining about the ACC not helping you out. I'm sure. Way to help yourself out, Florida State. You guys sucked also. God, yeah. God, the ACC stunk this year. UVA's awful. They're all bad.
What are UVA?
They're all bad.
Straight for?
You know what? Just do something once ever. That UVA.
Sean, Texas hangs on to beat Clemson 38-24. Clemson almost snuck their way back in. A great game by Cade Klubnik, who looked fantastic in the second half. I know that he didn't play a super clean game, but made a number of huge plays that almost put together a comeback for the Clemson Tigers. I think the biggest question for me, Sean, that I got to ask you, do you think Texas is a legit contender? I feel like the argument could be made for for Notre Dame. The argument could have been made for Penn State. I just don't know if watching what Texas did, slop around in the second half, give up a bunch of uncontested tight catches, and to get worked down the field by this passing attack makes me feel good about what they're going to do in tougher matchups.
Yeah, I needed to see more from Ewers in this one, and you could push back on me all you want and say, Sean, why do you need to see more? We had 2 running backs.
Well, wait, I thought that he was the future of the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Yeah, he's the future in the way of pushing a quarterback that needs to be pushed.
He's gonna go back for a 6th year so he can.
Let's all hope that we get to see the big arms
weird
stick
DMs
around
to students.
Texas, though, you could push back and say, wow, he didn't really need to have a superb game because Jaden Blue and Trey Wisner just absolutely went off, combining for over 150 yards and 4 touchdowns. So if Texas can do that, then you could make an argument that, yeah, maybe someone could stop them. I mean, if they can commit to stopping that run game, which would maybe open up the pass game. But it didn't feel like a full Texas performance yet again. Was it a good Texas performance? Yes. Did Clemson almost backdoor cover and make the whole house angry?
Yeah.
They came within inches of doing so.
Thank you for that hook, by the way. I said that in the first quarter. I said the hook is making me feel pretty good about
I
this.
really appreciated the hook. It was good enough. Look, it's a CFP win. How nitpicky can we get if we're moving along in the bracket? Like, we have to eventually be realistic if teams keep on moving on before we lay off some of the judgment and understand that, these are playoffs. We see it in hockey, MLB, NBA, NFL. We just see that teams can get hot and you just can't disparage a win like you can in the regular season. But am I sitting here after today thinking Texas, like I have more faith in Texas than I do Penn State? Probably not. From what I saw, Penn State gives me more hope, also because they have an easier path into the next round.
Right, and where this comes down to, their secondary gives up all these big plays in the second half against an improving young receiving core for Clemson, but certainly not a good one. They are not at the level that they could be next year. I'm not going to sit here and say that that's an ass receiving group, because it's not. It's well recruited. It's just not a productive one, especially against bigger opponents this year. They were non-existent in some of their tougher matchups against South Carolina, against Georgia at the beginning of the season. They didn't do anything. For them to give up all those big plays to their against their outside corners, that's where the concern comes into play. And we're looking down the barrel of who the next opponent that they could see that's going to test them. It's not Arizona State. It's Oregon, who's Tez Johnson, and they have Evan Stewart. You think that they're not going to have more success than what we saw in the second half? Or you think that Dylan Gabriel couldn't go for 400 yards, especially after the man has already beaten you in the Red River rivalry? I don't know. I just don't feel good about the path and where things line up for Texas. It's a good win. I'm not trying to discredit the victory, because you finish out the game and winning is winning. A win is a win is a win. But at the same time, you feel like that they could have kicked their ass just a little bit more.
Yeah.
Especially after they did in the first half.
I know. But they had two. Blue averaged 10.4 carry and Wisner 7.3. If they do that against Oregon, it'll be way closer than everyone thinks. If they average half of what they did combined tonight, then it will still be closer than expected. To put a pin in Clemson this year, Klubnik, I think, he won't get talked about as much at the end of the year, because we obviously have the expanded playoff. There's more teams still competing in relevancy and in the news cycle, but he impressed me this year. I don't want to let it go unmentioned.
He's a dude for next year. Seriously.
For what I saw, for my expectations for him this year, my expectations for Clemson, which were low and low, what he did and to show that he had some boss up moments in him, and that he had some legitimate arm strength, arm pop, arm accuracy in him. It showed me a lot this year, and I would be optimistic if I was a Clemson fan if that dude's my quarterback next year.
Yeah, that's the last thing I want to agree with you here before we jump to the next game. I think that he has gotten better every single week, and especially down the stretch. And if those young receivers take the step that they need to, he could have a big season, and he could be like Drew Allar and 45-year-old Quinn Ewers when he goes back to school and transfers to Michigan. He absolutely Kate Klubnik could absolutely be a top 5 pick amongst this next upcoming class.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Sean, in the nightcap of the college football playoff, the last game, Tennessee pissed down their leg. They did not show up in this matchup against Ohio State. I think the only real takeaway here, outside of one, first of all, Tennessee, they're a year away. They are a team that Nico needs another year to really get acclimated to being and understanding what it takes to be a top-tier SEC quarterback, top quarterback in the country. He's got all the tools. Let's give him time. Let's see what they do in 2025. Huge step forward that they made it this far this season and made it to the playoff. Did not play well in this game, though. No receivers were getting open. I think that the major takeaway from this, Sean, has to be that Ohio State looks like a legit threat to win a national title. I know that's kind of like the theme of this show is, who looked real and who looked fake. That has to be the biggest thing that we're looking for from all of these games. One thing that I discussed leading up to this game on a number of the spots that I did and shows that I did was saying that Ohio State is the biggest wild card. If they come out swinging and firing on all cylinders and they play as good as they did 2 years ago when they faced off with Georgia and narrowly lost off of a missed field goal, if they play that way and they have that intent, energy, and focus, they can go on to win this national championship game. That is the truest out of any team that we saw today and yesterday. It is 1,000% the most accurate for any of those teams because they have the roster. They have just fallen short against Oregon once, and they lost focus against Michigan and white-knuckled that matchup. They know how to beat Oregon. They almost did it the first time.
Yeah, if Ohio State had a lot of things go right for him. They had Will Howard with a very slim amount of incompletions. That's great. He went over 300 yards. That's also great. Their big two running backs show up for them with touchdowns each. Most importantly, we've been ranting and raving about it. This Ohio State offense is so much better when Jeremiah Smith is involved. And he has a huge day. Shocker. Ohio State's putting up a big number, getting their defense nice and rested, and they have probably the most dynamic playmaker on their team, which is saying a lot, with a huge day. Having him become a focal point of the passing offense is so critical down the stretch because you really can't cover him that long. You can cover him for some snaps, and some snaps, maybe Will Howard doesn't see him. Some snaps, maybe he's not the best option on the pass if it's like a third and medium. But for the most part, he's going to be open, and if they can target him and get him the ball, Ohio State should have the advantage versus just about any defense in the remaining field. On the flip side, Tennessee, you did no service for your conference in this one. I mean, the days...
how could... These teams shouldn't be getting handouts. How dare Tennessee? This has made no sense. Why they shouldn't have gotten in.
Justin Herbert.
They didn't beat anyone.
Justin Herbert and Joe Burrow deserve apologies for being crowned if kings, whereas the SEC
hypothetical winner
has been hypothetical czar of this first round of the CFP. Of somehow Ole Miss is getting shouts from the very back. I can't believe it. South Carolina was somehow quiet today. They actually had some purpose to get at least a little bit vocal. Alabama, 3 losses. You can't have 3 losses. There's a lot of things that can happen that you can say about this CFP field. But the one thing that every SEC homer, every dirt-ditter, everybody that just loves the SEC and thinks that they're always playing a better brand of football, this is the last outcome possible that you wanted to see was Big Bad Tennessee rolling in against the Buckeyes that just lost to Michigan and getting their doors busted off.
Here's what's going to happen. I'm telling you right now. Next week, when Arizona State loses big and Boise State loses big, we're going to hear, if that was Tennessee, if Tennessee was there, they would have boat raced Texas or they would have boat raced Penn State. I can't wait. It's going to happen. Going to happen.
I almost enjoy the absurdity of the Alabama faithful of just deciding, the holiday season isn't good enough for us anymore to just be with family, get a nice buzz on, give some gifts, eat some good food. We need to scream at the top of our all of December. Let's just get fired up. And I'm sure there's stuff to do in Alabama. There must not be enough because the way that they have been marching on Twitter all weekend has been insufferable. And now here's your big representative, a team that you lost to this year. Busted up.
There's one good SEC team this year, and it's Florida.
That's it.
And they don't have their starting quarterback.
And you know what? Now we're pointing out. Now everyone's got the hot, spicy take. Well, there's hardly ever going to be 12 good teams that would actually win a national championship.
Definitely not 12 good SEC teams.
There's definitely not 12 good SEC teams. There's definitely not 6 of them or 5 of them
or 3.
Yeah, no. So
2.
There's one. You got one, and you're acting like we all want to watch Ole Miss and watch Jackson Dart get his head taken off for 4 straight quarters like we watched all season. Or watch Lenora Sellers overthrow receivers like we did all season. Or I can't. Okay,
good point.
What happens if Jalen Milroe has a good game? He runs for 3 touchdowns, throws for 1, and they win.
3 picks against Oklahoma.
He throws for 3 picks against Oklahoma. So whatever brand of football that you think has been so distinguishably better than everything that everyone else, all the other slop that Indiana put out, the slop that SMU put out, get over yourselves. It was comical how the night ended.
I don't mind the rhetoric of bringing up SMU and saying that, hey, look, SMU, they clearly didn't belong. And, I got into it with somebody on Twitter, and I just stopped responding to them because I made this statement of, that's a G5 team. They quite literally were a G5 team last year. They brought in some new players that were from P4 programs that were backups on P4 programs, but that roster mostly were G5 guys. They played like a bunch of G5 guys today. Yeah, that was what they looked like. They did not look like they were on the same playing field. But to what you're just bringing up here, if Tennessee's supposed to be the 3rd best team, and some argued maybe they're better than Texas, and that was the way that they played against the 2nd best Big Ten team, I don't know if we have that same argument. If they played against Penn State today, they probably get their asses kicked too. You're right. Like if Nico has that many issues in the pocket and can't find there's just no open receivers, and he has to, the only way that they can move the ball and score points was him just scrambling and trying to extend plays. If that was it, Jackson Dart's getting crumpled in the pocket because Ole Miss's offensive line's bad. South Carolina's offensive line is bad. Alabama's offensive line is good, but they had their own inconsistencies and deficiencies, like we saw the way that they played against Oklahoma. So do we really trust that in a road setting, traveling to Penn State or traveling to Ohio State, that they were going to, or even Notre Dame, that they were going to show up and play a great game? I'm fine having the discussion, but to act like it is just some clear-cut, bona fide, yes, they had to have been there, we needed 4 or 5 SEC teams, I think is just wrong.
It's crazy. And you know what? I like the crazy. I love the crazy college football. This is the chaos that makes it fun, is because everyone today is yelling at each other and dunking on one another as the narrative progresses. But Fernelli tweeted something at like noon today. And it was like, you're not that passionate about college football. You're passionate about your opinions on college football. And I think that's what drives the sport. That's great. But
that's what makes it better than the NFL.
Yeah, and then
there's less of that in the NFL.
There is less of that. It's more just regional homerism,
right,
and some longtime rivalries. But when you got people like, at this point, I don't know if it was intentional by Herb Street, because you know what? That just stoked everyone saying that Indiana was outclassed. Notre Dame is a good team. They are. Bits and shtick aside, they're a good team, and they would have beat all the losers from today as well. It's just what would have happened. So to say they were outclassed in a year where parity is insane, and we're just looking at a bunch of teams that can beat everybody, that's so unfair that I have to think maybe he's been in the media long enough to know this is going to stoke the people up.
Yeah.
Because he knows who he needs to stoke up. Yeah. College football needs the SEC fans to be angry, to be passionate, and defend their conference like it's their child. And I think that's what makes it great. It's also what makes it infuriating.
We'll see what ends up happening. We're going to have one more show this week, which is going to be our NFL show. So stay tuned for that. And then happy holidays to everybody. We're off for Christmas. We'll talk to you folks later. For the rest of your week.